Hello, I'm Bob Charlap, and this is number 0825 of the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, and it comes to you right now.
The following program is brought to you in living color.
Now, it's time for an eclectic mix of interviews and some of the oddest news stories you'll ever hear. It's the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Hey there, hi there, ho there! Peter Anthony Holder here with you, and yes, this is indeed another edition of the Stuff File program, number 0825. And coming up on this edition of the Stuff File program, NASA expert Rod Pyle is back on the show talking about the NASA budget cuts and the effects it will have on U.S. space exploration.
We've been hearing about these proposed budget cuts for a couple of months. Basically, there's a preview that the government quietly sends out, and of course that leaks. And the hue and cry went up in the panic in the space press, saying this is the death of the agency. Which may be a bit of an exaggeration, but it's a huge hit to all space science and kind of an interesting twist to the guts on the human spaceflight side of NASA.
Donna Rowley is the manager of the Canadian Potato Museum in O'Leary, Prince Edward Island. The museum has been there since 1993, and outside of the museum is a giant potato that's been there since 1997. The museum grew from a small exhibit to what it is today.
They opened the Potato Museum in 93, and then again, somebody had a conversation with one of our economic development officers, Eva Rodgson is her name, and it was just a local farmer that said, we should have something for people to take a photo of when they come to that museum. We should have a giant potato somewheres in O'Leary. They didn't really know where they were going to put it, but eventually it did land on our doorstep, basically. So it is probably the most photographed iconic structure in O'Leary that people take a photo of before they enter the museum.
Mike Bezemek is the author of Mysteries of the National Parks. How did this book come to be?
As I began to continue to think about it, I was like, how many national park units have I been to over the years that have interesting mysteries associated with them? Instantly, I thought of the sliding stones of Death Valley. I went there on a field trip with the geology program out of UC Davis. There were other mysteries I knew about up and down those big national park units all along the West Coast and the Mountain West. And then I thought about the Midwestern ones I've been to, and I was like, man, there are mysteries associated with those too. So suddenly I was like, this is the concept. The concept is the mysteries of the national parks. And I began to develop the book and the project from there.
And there's lots and lots of Stuff File news. Plus, dad joke theater, morning shower thoughts, and an idiot of the day. The guest later, the person who told you this was show number 0825, was Bob Charlap, who is a freelance TV technician at Fox Sports in Dallas. And we actually went to college together way back in the day in, of course, television. Thank you very much, Bob, for doing the guest slate on this edition of the Stuff File program, a show that is listener-supported, fan-funded radio that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Well, let's get right to the stuff. A 15-year-old in California got stuck in an abandoned well shaft while attempting to save the family dogs. Emergency responders from the Nevada County Consolidated Fire Rescue successfully rescued the teen and the two dogs. The teen had descended about 15 to 20 feet into the shaft to help the pets, but was unable to climb back out. The vertical rope rescue operation was conducted, lasting approximately an hour, resulting in all three being brought to the surface without serious injuries. The teen was evaluated and found unharmed, while the dogs were treated for minor dehydration. The fire department emphasized the importance of avoiding unsafe structures and prompt reporting of emergencies. Well, I guess we live in different times. Back in my day, it was the dog who rescued the humans from the well.
Here, Lassie, take it to Gran.
You sure that dog understood, son?
Sure she did. Here it comes.
The good old days. A North Carolina mother was arrested and charged with assaulting a school employee and trespassing after a violent incident at her daughter's middle school. 33-year-old Mariah Hector was called to Randolph Middle School in Charlotte on May the 5th due to her daughter's involvement in a fight. According to reports, Hector became hostile during the meeting and was asked to leave. Instead, she allegedly pushed past an employee, shoved the school principal, Jennifer Schroeder, into a wall, and then grabbed Assistant Superintendent Jennifer Dean by the neck, attempting to choke her. Dean did not lose consciousness, but had visible signs of injury. The school was placed on lockdown and Hector was taken into custody. As for Mariah's middle school daughter getting into a fight, I just can't put my finger on where that type of behavior comes from. 59-year-old Robert Delahant, a DoorDash driver, was arrested after returning to a Vancouver, Washington home armed with a gun to demand a tip that he felt he was owed. The incident occurred after Delahant did not receive a cash tip on a $100 order the previous night. When confronted by the homeowner, Delahant allegedly reached for his holstered firearm, leading to a physical altercation. After driving away from the resident in his Kia Soul, Delahant called police dispatch and advised that the house cheated him out of a tip, so he returned and was pushed. Cops say Delahant, who smelled of booze, admitted to drinking at home before returning to the client's residence. He was charged with assault, harassment, and driving under the influence. DoorDash has since terminated Delahant's employment. Well, I'm guessing and hoping that when he gets out of jail, not only will his DoorDash employment be no more, but he probably won't even have items delivered to his own house by DoorDash.
DoorDash can DoorDash pretty much anything.
Nope, this is not what DoorDash had in mind in this commercial. And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our first guest here on this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
Greetings, passengers, to another Stuff File program installment of Idiots in Flight. This is the pre-boarding announcement. We are now inviting those passengers who are complete half-wits to begin boarding at this time. Thank you.
Actually, this time it's not a passenger. A British Airways cabin crew member was discovered dancing naked in a business class toilet during a flight from San Francisco to London Heathrow. The 41-year-old unnamed crew member was supposed to be serving meals to passengers, but had disappeared. After the Airbus A380-800 was searched, the in-flight crew manager allegedly found the crew member naked and dancing in the Club World cabin toilet. Staff dressed their colleague in spare first-class passenger pajamas and buckled him into a first-class seat for the remainder of the 10.5-hour flight. Why the pajamas? Where was his clothes? Anyway, upon arrival at Heathrow, police met the plane and arrested him for suspected drug use. Said one other crew member, the plane was cruising at 37,000 feet over the Atlantic, but this bloke seemed to be higher than anyone else. The crew member was taken to hospital before being arrested on suspicion of being unfit for duty. Okay, I believe dancing naked in a bathroom is more than a suspicion.
Here's a warning to some passengers. The air marshals are getting creative. For most of the flight, you might have zip-tied limbs and you may be duct-taped in an overhead bin until your diverted destination. But the Stuff File program appreciates you. Thank you.
Anyway, let's get to our first guest here on this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? In Washington, the government has slashed away at NASA's budget. What does that mean for space exploration going forward? We put that question to NASA expert Rod Pyle as he is once again back on the show. He's the editor-in-chief of Ad Astra magazine, which is published by the National Space Society. He's also the co-host of the podcast This Week in Space. Rod joins us once again via Zoom from California. Hi, Rod.
Hello, Sir Peter. How are you?
Just tickety-boo. Let me ask how you're feeling, because this is definitely a blow to the NASA community.
Well, those of us who are involved either directly or indirectly are sort of getting used to these full body blows under this current administration. And I'm not a big fan, but, you go with what you got. And I guess I could say I was lucky to have my Jet Propulsion Lab NASA contract zeroed out a year before all this started happening. So I was prepared. But that was just a general budget cut. So what we're seeing now has got a lot of people, seasoned space watchers and astronauts and former NASA executives scratching their heads like, what next? It's like in the general news talking about the tariffs, what's going to happen when the commander-in-chief wakes up this morning. So we've been hearing about these proposed budget cuts for a couple of months. There was forget what they call it, but basically there's a preview that the government quietly sends out for evaluation, although not necessarily looking for comment from NASA and others. And of course that leaks. The hue and cry went up in the panic in the space press saying this is the death of the agency, which may be a bit of an exaggeration, but it is certainly, as we're going to discuss, a huge hit to all space science and kind of an interesting twist to the guts on the human spaceflight side of NASA. And then, over the weekend, while I was at a Apollo anniversary event with some moonwalkers and a former flight director and other people, other luminaries in that era, then we suddenly hear that Jared Isaacman, who was nominated by Trump to be the new NASA administrator, and it seemed like a very good choice to everybody in the field that I talked to, we were quite pleased. It was supposed to be confirmed, I think, yesterday or today by the rest of Congress, and his nomination was withdrawn. So, yes, we're reeling.
Well, you mentioned tariffs earlier and the uncertainty of that. Is that a similar situation with NASA? Is it the body blow of the budget being cut, or the idea that they don't know what's next?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure I have an answer for. Certainly the uncertainty has been huge, and we've been seeing, it's never a good sign when NASA or somebody talked about NASA schedules a press conference for Friday afternoon, my time, because that means they're sort of trying to bury it in the news trench at the end of the week, and usually there's a good reason for that. So we've been seeing a lot of that, and talking to people up at JPL, where I used to work, and at a couple of the other NASA field centers. There's just this sick feeling in the pit of their stomach that they don't know what's happening. Now, this recent reduction in budget, which is the lowest since 1961 in adjusted dollars, includes releasing about a third of NASA's total workforce, which is a huge hit. And as mentioned, shutting down a big chunk of the science program. So the overall budget's been reduced by, I think, 24%, and NASA science is being cut just about in half.
There's a
lot to untangle in there.
Aren't there also some leading projects that have started and are being built that are also being cut?
So, I talk about China often because they're kind of our leading competitor, if you believe we're in a race with them, which I personally think we are. And, they make plans 10 years in advance, and they spend money and build things and launch them, and they have great successes. And they move very quickly. We have this habit, partially it's because of our democratic process, of building rockets and then saying, just kidding. So, yeah, we've got a bunch of things happening here. So on the human spaceflight side, which is more important to Trump, clearly, than science. We have the Space Launch System, the SLS, and the Orion capsule, which are supposed to be what take us back to the moon with the Artemis program, which have been struggling along literally for about 23 years at this point. It was first proposed as Constellation by George W. Bush way back in the early 2020s, or 2000s. We've been building this thing 3 times as long as it took to build the Saturn V, but we finally got it right. So it's the moon rocket we have. It's too expensive, it's taking too long, but it's been flown and it works. And now they said, you know what? We'll do that first moon landing in 2027, chuckle behind the hand, and then we'll cancel that and we'll go private. And I'm all for private space. It's a great way to do things, but nobody's proven that capability yet. And Starship, as you know, SpaceX's mega rocket is far from being able to do that, as near as we can tell. On the science side, most of the cuts are going against astrophysics, heliophysics, and climate science. No surprise on the last one. Now, astrophysics, you could argue, if we discover it tomorrow or we discover it in 10 years, that's not a huge hit, although certainly the people who work in astrophysics would not agree with that. But, from a public perspective, I can live without more astrophysics data for a couple of years if I have to. Heliophysics includes understanding how and when these huge coronal mass ejections and other things may be coming from the sun. And if those are big enough, they can wipe out electric grids and GPS satellites and so forth. So that's kind of important. And I doubt I have to do much convincing of you to understand that climate science is important.
Absolutely.
And those are getting wiped out. But also hardware. They were talking about canceling this space telescope, the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope, which is finished, but that escaped by the hair of its chinny chin chin. Juno is out in orbit around Jupiter, doing great work. It's in its extended mission. That'll be shut down. Not happy about that, but I understand it. There's another mission. I don't know if you remember OSIRIS-REx. It was an asteroid sampling mission that was very successful. And as NASA will do, especially on the JPL side, they extended the mission by repurposing and redirecting it to go visit another asteroid, calling it OSIRIS-APEX. That's going to be shut down. Is visiting one more asteroid critical? No, but it's part of planetary defense planning, so we know what to do when one of these things comes hurtling towards our planet. The New Horizons mission is still out beyond Pluto, exploring the Kuiper Belt. That's going to be shut down. Cancels 2 Venus missions. Yeah, Venus, the science is cool, but it's the trailer park of the solar system, so I'm not going to cry about that. However, it also cancels the Mars sample return mission, which has been in trouble for a long time. So we're basically just handing that one to China because they've shown that they can do things like that. Weirdly, and I'll stop. I know I'm really going on about this. It shuts off NASA's MAVEN and Mars Odyssey orbiters, which have been there a long time. And, they've done a lot of the work they were sent to do, but they're part of the global communication system we need for future Mars missions, including with humans. So there's some muttering about replacing those with something more modern, but as it is, they work, and that's important. And finally, it cancels NASA's participation in the European Space Agency new Mars rover, including we were going to provide a launcher. And we do that a lot, and every time we do it, the Europeans and other international partners kind of think, we can't trust these guys. You don't know what they're going to drink or what they're going to do next. So it's very, very tough.
During his election campaign and also in the first part of his administration, Donald Trump said that he wanted to go to the moon and he wanted to go to Mars. And I'm thinking primarily, and I'm speculating here, that it was mostly ego. He wanted to be the president that could do these things. So from that perspective, was this body blow of a budget a surprise to you, considering what he had said all the way through his campaign and in the first part of his administration so far?
Well, it kind of was, because given the importance of his ego, I figured he'd keep the budget about where it was, which is just shy of $25 billion, and pull money from science to rain it on human spaceflight so we could get to the moon. And, we've been to the moon. We're going back to the moon. Trump wants to see it during his presidency. But that program's in kind of a mess. And I'm telling you, the Chinese are serious about it. They say by 2030, but you and I both know they're going to make it happen no matter what the risk by 2029, because October 2029 is the 80th anniversary of the People's Republic. And that's very important there. And they do root their programs in the popular mind in a lot of mythology and nationalism and that kind of dialogue. So they're very good at it, by the way, in terms of the domestic audience. So I think that's a done deal. And if Trump wants to be able to continue bragging about this, we got to step things up because we're behind. And of course, this wouldn't happen if we hadn't said, yeah, we're going back to the moon before you are, but we did. So now there's a lot of geopolitics and, nationalism at work here. The only possible other pivot I can see him doing, and they sort of started talking about it, but it hasn't really been detailed yet, is, we'll skip the moon and go to Mars. Well, it's a simple sentence, but it's a really big deal. 7 months in a small spacecraft or even a big spacecraft with Starship, with unproven life support and no known radiation abatement system. I mean, you'd rather not have your astronauts dead before they hit orbit. So there's a lot to untangle here, and it is confusing.
Well, we're just about out of time, but I'll ask just one more question, and that is, do you have a glimmer of hope that this thing can actually turn around? And, at some point, assuming that NASA goes back to the moon, around 2028, that will be the end or post-end of the Trump administration. Things could turn around regardless of whether it's a Republican or a Democrat at that time.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see if they continue their initiatives. From Trump to Biden to Trump, things stayed more or less steady until this recent upheaval. I will say the rumor mill has a retired Air Force general named Steve Quast, Lieutenant General, as the next potential pick for NASA administrator. I know him a little bit. I know more about him than I know personally, but I have met him a few times. And he's a big-time Trump supporter, which will help. He's a deeply religious man, which is going to be interesting. But, unlike Isaacman had a lot of good traits, but one of them was not really knowing the political machine of Washington. Quast has been through that grinder a lot, especially with his upper level stuff with the military. And I think, the best NASA administrators have been like Jim Webb. They know how to pick a good fight. They know where the skeletons are buried. They know how to wear brass knuckles. And Quast is a nice guy, but he's a retired general, and I think it's got to take that kind of person to pull this together and push it forward. So I do have hope there.
On that note, we'll just end it because there's always hope, like the Star Wars movie, The New Hope. There you go.
The sun will come out tomorrow. I won't sing to you. That would be cruel.
Rod, thank you very much for being on the program with us once again.
Thank you, sir.
NASA expert Rod Pyle, editor-in-chief for Ad Astra magazine, published by the National Space Society, and the co-host of the podcast This Week in Space. By the way, I have to mention, as a subscriber myself of Ad Astra magazine, as far as space fans are concerned, if you're not already a subscriber, you should be, because Ad Astra magazine is not only a detailed publication that comes out quarterly, it's also amazingly beautiful. And Rod is also the author of 20 popular books, including First on the Moon, the Apollo 11 50th Anniversary Experience, and also Destination Mars. You can go to our website at thestuffall.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0825, and you'll find the link to Rod's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his books directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
And now, Dad Joke Theater.
I met a girl who runs a battery kiosk at the park. She sells sea-cells by the seesaw.
Join us again for another Stuff File program, Dad Joke Theater.
There's still more guests, more news, and an idiot of the day coming your way on the Stuff File program. Stay tuned. The Stuff File program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio show that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Sign up and find out about our rewards program. Being a patron doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. There's absolutely no obligation. You could join today and end whenever you'd like. But the time we have your support would be so greatly appreciated. We'd also love to hear your thoughts about the show and even your ideas for rewards. Join us for the ride. Join us at patreon.com/thestuffileprogram.
I'm standing on the world stage for Canada. Hi, this is Leona Boyd. Nothing compares to the feeling I always get performing as a Canadian. I've toured with Gordon Lightfoot. You don't get more Canadian than that. Please, buy Canadian. Shop as if your country depends on it. Keep your money in Canada, for Canada.
Choosy mothers choose the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. If your mother didn't choose it for you, well, I guess she just doesn't love you.
And still to come on the program, we'll talk to the manager of the Canadian Potato Museum. Plus, we'll meet the author of Mysteries of the National Parks. We also have a morning shower thought and, of course, an idiot of the day, and much more in Stuff File News right here, right now. The Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands has unveiled a new exhibit featuring a nearly 200-year-old condom with erotic artwork. The prophylactic, believed to be made around 1830 from a sheep's appendix, depicts a nun and 3 clergymen in an erotic scene. The phrase, "This is my choice," is written on the sheath in French, which the museum says is a reference to the Renoir painting The Judgment of Paris. According to the museum, acquiring the condom has allowed them to focus on 19th century sexuality and prostitution, a subject under representation in their collection. Historians believe the condom might have been a souvenir from a brothel. The museum states the condom embodies both the lighter and darker sides of sexual health during a time when the pursuit of pleasure was fraught with fears of unwanted pregnancy and sexually transmitted diseases. Exactly how is that different from now? Anyway, the exhibit will be on display until the end of November. And if you're still making your travel plans, here's another sight to see. Turkmenistan's top tourist attraction is the Gateway to Hell, a huge gas leak that has been burning since 1971 in the Karakum Desert. The fire started when Soviet scientists accidentally drilled into an underground pocket of gas and then ignited it, starting a blaze that could be seen from several kilometers away. Officials announced this week that the fire has been reduced threefold, said Irina Lurieva, a director at the state-owned energy company Turkmengaz. Today, only a faint source of combustion remains. Wells have been drilled around the site to capture the methane from the leak. Wow. If this is a trip that your travel agent suggests to you, then fire your travel agent.
It's a gas!
A semi hauling around 70,000 pounds of beehives overturned near Linden, Washington, along with what Whatcom County officials estimated to be about 250 million bees. The Whatcom County Sheriff's Office said on official media, avoid the area due to the potential of bee escape and swarming. The accident shut down the road as more than 24 beekeepers worked to rehive the bees. By that afternoon, the road was reopened and the hives recovered and back in use. Wow, thank the Lord. Those bees were noisy. Anyway, according to the sheriff's office, by morning, most bees should have returned to their hives. They also revised the estimated number of bees slightly from 250 million to only 14 million. Nothing had been released about the status of the truck driver or the cause of the crash. Well, I can understand how they overestimated the number of bees. I mean, it must be difficult to count them one by one. I'm guessing they counted the wings and divided by 4. And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, a wild elephant caused chaos in a grocery store in Thailand when it entered from a nearby national park and helped itself to snacks. The male elephant was captured on video, calmly snatching and eating food from the shelves, and despite attempts by national park workers to shoo him away, the elephant continued to enjoy his impromptu snack time. The shop owner recounted that the elephant consumed 9 bags of sweet rice crackers, a sandwich, and dried bananas before leaving without causing harm. The incident highlighted the ongoing issue of wild elephants venturing into human settlements in search of food due to the habitat loss caused by agricultural expansion. You know, elephants never forget, so he'll be back. And let's get to our next guest here on this edition of the Stuff File program. If you have ever traveled to Prince Edward Island, you might want to stop by the Canadian Potato Museum, which is located in O'Leary, PEI. The manager there is Donna Rowley, and she joins us via Zoom from the Canadian Potato Museum. Hi, Donna.
Hi, Peter. How are you?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks very much for being on the program with us. You are open not all year round, and also I understand they have a different time for the restaurant. So, first of all, let's talk about your opening season.
Okay. For the museum itself, we usually run the 1st of May. Actually, this year was May the 12th, and we're running to October the 10th, just before the Thanksgiving weekend. We open the museum at 9:30 in the morning. It runs till 5:30, and our restaurant opens at 11:30 to 5:30.
The restaurant also has a shorter season, or at least it did at some point, right?
It did at one point. People used to be a bit disappointed when they would come into the museum and it was only the museum that was open, because we tend to leave the restaurant till sometimes the later part of June to begin the operations. So we decided the last couple of years, I guess, just after COVID, I think is when they just changed those times to have the restaurant running the same time as the museum. So people who come in then can have a bite to eat if they'd like, or if they choose not to, that's their choice as well. So
okay, we'll get to the restaurant in a moment, but first of all, you really can't miss the Canadian Potato Museum because there's a giant potato outside.
There is. Yes, there is. That potato's been standing there since 1997.
How did it get there? Like, who decided we need a giant potato?
So the Potato Museum itself opened in 93. It's run by a volunteer board of directors. I should mention that as well. So I just do the day-to-day, and it is overseen by a board of directors. Just a little backstory. The Community Museum of O'Leary is kind of what it consisted of. And there was a small little display about the potato industry in that little exhibit. And someone just in passing mentioned, and it was literally just a small conversation they had, such a small display about potatoes, and the industry is so big on the island, you would think there would be a larger exhibit somewhere. And literally that's kind of what planted the seed, if I want to say that, of starting the Potato Museum. So long story short, they opened Potato Museum in 93. And then again, somebody had a conversation with one of our economic development officers, Eva Rodgson is her name. And it was just a local farmer that said, we should have something for people to take a photo of when they come to that museum. We should have a giant potato somewheres in O'Leary. They didn't really know where they were going to put it, but eventually it did land on our doorstep, basically. So it is probably the most photographed iconic structure in O'Leary that people take a photo of before they enter the museum. That's kind of how that came about.
Now, I understand that O'Leary has less than 1,000 people, and your Canadian Potato Museum attracts thousands.
We did. Last year was a record for us. We hit almost a 20,000 visitation for traffic for the museum, which is the highest in all the years that I've worked there. When I originally started, seems like 100 years ago sometimes, but traffic was probably under 2,000-3,000 people would come through the museum, and it's literally increased its visitation over those years. Up to last year was just under 20,000. So
that's an amazing success. And no matter what kind of grouping you are in, there's always someone who's a Debbie Downer. And I'm just curious, when this first started, did anyone balk at the idea that there would be or should be a Canadian Potato Museum?
Probably. Obviously, I wasn't there when they started the idea of putting things together, but I think the success of it was kind of a shock to some people. I don't think they realized how iconic the industry is on the island. I guess we take that for granted living here and having potatoes surround us all the time. So the idea of somebody actually coming and wanting to learn about potatoes is kind of an odd question to put to people, I guess. So I would probably say, yeah, there's probably some around that were a little bit thinking it was a waste of money, perhaps. I don't know. I hope they've come to visit since then, though.
Again, we'll get to the restaurant in a moment, but when one goes to the Canadian Potato Museum, what can you expect to see? What's the big attraction that is there that draws the people in?
So the museum itself is based on history, and it is an educational museum. We have an interpretive center that kind of walks you through a little bit of the history behind the humble potato, we'll say, kind of where it began and kind of how it made its way to Prince Edward Island itself and as well to Canada. And we also have a huge display of antique farm equipment that we've been collecting over the years, and we're probably still collecting. A lot of it's made in PEI, farming equipment, made in Canada, and we do have some international equipment there as well. So it is very educational. We also have a gift shop, of course, with some quirky potato items that people can buy that perhaps they can't find anywhere else. And we also have kept our local community museum. So that museum will always be part of the building, and it still showcases the history of O'Leary itself. So
Okay, define quirky potato memorabilia.
Well, we have anything from like a plush potato to a stress ball potato to a potato that's been crocheted into like a zipper pull. I saw tablecloths, aprons. I'm off the top of my head now. I should probably just walk around and have a look while I'm talking to you. But anything and everything from a coffee mug to a tablecloth or a table runner or even the microwavable bags that you would cook a potato in the microwave. So not the entire gift shop is made of potato items. We do have a lot of local artisans that come in there, but we try and bring in as many quirky items as we can. And people, they enjoy buying them, I believe.
Now, I understand that underneath the heading of macabre, there are miniature coffins with potatoes in them. Why is that?
The focus on that, I think, was for the pests and diseases that do affect the crop. So as you're going through the exhibit, you'll see little tiny coffins with a little potato inside that's been affected by some sort of a disease, a pest, or anything like that. So we have them kind of displayed through the exhibit. Now, it wasn't our idea to do that. This exhibit actually was donated to the museum, I think it was back in 99, and it came up from the science exhibit in Ottawa. And they were changing their display and they were looking for somewhere to rehome their exhibits. So they contacted the museum volunteer board, and some local farmers actually stored these the displays in their warehouses until the exhibit had been constructed and stuff. So we can't honestly say we came up with the idea, but I really think it's kind of a cute idea. And a lot of people actually, we've had children actually come in the other day and they only want to see the coffins that somebody else had been in and talked about. So we just let them go down and had a look at the coffins, and they thought it was pretty cool.
Okay, so let's get to the restaurant. First of all, how many different ways can you make a potato?
Oh, it's endless. I think if you can come up with any idea, it's possible to do whatever you want with a potato. Our focus on the museum is we do anything from a fresh cut fry to baked potatoes topped many different ways to we do a potato soup. We also make potato fudge. So that's iconic for us as well, to do our potato fudge, which is actually something you can sample when you come in the front door. Even before you get to buy it, you get to taste it. So.
And what's your favorite?
Oh, gosh. My best way to cook a potato is probably scalloped potatoes, but I do love just a simple baked potato with cheese and bacon. I am very plain, I know it, but that is kind of probably one of the simplest and most filling meals that I could have, would just be a baked potato with some cheese and bacon on it.
And in your estimation, over the years that you've been working there, what's the best visitor reaction that you got to the Canadian Potato Museum?
Probably another backstory. When they first put that big potato in, it was located towards the entrance of the driveway at the museum. And over the years, the trees that had grown up kind of would obscure the potato, believe it or not, because the potato stands 14 feet high. And people would come in and they would come busting in the door, not really busting in the door, but they'd open up the door and they'd say, okay, where's that big potato at? And we'd be like standing there kind of dumbfounded thinking, well, you just literally like walked past it. But when they drove in, they weren't seeing it. So we did actually take that potato and we moved it to right up to the entrance of the doorway as you walk up. So a lot of people, they can't miss it now when they come in. But that's probably the funniest reaction I had when visitors come in, because they really wanted to see this big potato. And I think they thought it was inside and not outdoors.
So obviously the big potato, the giant potato, precedes the visitors. I'm assuming they either met people who have gone to the museum in the past, or they've read about it. I'm looking at a picture right now of said giant potato. So it's out there, especially on social media.
It is, yeah. And some people actually, just come and have a photo with the potato and they don't come in, which is perfectly fine. And you do see, like, people will post, we stopped by the Potato Museum, maybe it was after hours, and they put it on social media. And then you can sometimes see the comments underneath if they tag us. They'll say, friend of mine was here, so we needed to stop, only if we had to get a picture of this big potato. So it's definitely iconic. We're not the only one in the world, but we like to think that we're probably one of the first ones that had been around. So and it's continued to be an icon for the museum as well.
Well, congratulations. I mean, you live in a community that's less than 1,000 people and you get 20,000 visitors. all because of the Canadian Potato Museum. So congratulations on that. Donna, thank you very much for taking the time to be on the program with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Donna Rowley, the manager at the Canadian Potato Museum in O'Leary, Prince Edward Island. You can go to our website at thestuffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0825, and you'll find the links to the museum's site. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
Giving you something to think about. This is Morning Shower Thoughts.
If you're cremated after you die, you can be put into an hourglass and continue to participate in family game night.
Morning Shower Thoughts from the Stuff File program.
Got something for the mailbag? Drop Peter a line. He'd love to hear from you. Send your email to mailbag@thestufffile.com. And remember, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's mailbag@thestufffile.com. Or catch up with him on Twitter or Facebook. There's more Stuff File coming your way in just a few moments.
Here's a brief word about our show and my book. If you become a regular Patreon patron of the Stuff File program, I'll give you an e-version of my book, Great Conversations, My Interviews with Two Men on the Moon and a Galaxy of Stars. It's easy to do. Just go to patreon.com and become a patron to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. So, join Patreon and claim your copy of Great Conversations, My Interviews with Two Men on the Moon and a Galaxy of Stars. Sign up at patreon.com/The Stuff File program.
You're listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. In the interest of time, kindly hold your applause until the entire program is over.
And still to come on the program, we have one more guest. We also have an Idiot of the Day. And I've got one more Stuff File news story to share with you right here, right now. Well, no longer weird. Alligator stories from Florida. But this alligator story might be. Not one, but two motorcyclists were injured on May 31st in Volusia County after they hit an alligator crossing I-4. 67-year-old Cameron Gilmore said he and 25-year-old Brandy Goss were riding with a larger group when he saw, quote, a big blob in the road. Goss added, "I just seen something and it was too late." Goss sustained a concussion and cracked wrist bone. Gilmore had a broken foot and toes. The alligator's fate is unknown. But it does add a new variation to a joke. People are going to ask now, why did the alligator cross the road? Yeah. Anyway, let's get to our last guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program. Mike Bezemek is an author who has written multiple books and has written for many publications, including Outside, Men's Health, and Paddling Magazine. His previous book was Space Age Adventures, over 100 terrestrial sights and out-of-this-world stories. But his most recent book is just out, and it's called Mysteries of the National Parks. Mike joins us via Zoom from South Carolina. Hi, Mike.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on the program with us. I want to talk about your previous book, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But let's talk about your most recent one, which is Mysteries of the National Parks. Now, we were talking a little bit off air before, and it seems like just on your resume that you are a very outdoorsy guy. And I got that sense in talking to you beforehand. Which came first, the idea that you wanted to be a writer or the idea that you were outside a lot and wanted to write about said stories?
It's a really good question. I think I had an interest in writing from a really young age because my mom was really into writing, but I definitely got swept up in kind of outdoor adventures. And so I would say that kind of took over for a while. I joined the Boy Scouts. I was camping, exploring a lot. I went off to college at UC Davis. I always had this interest in writing, but I didn't really pursue it right away. I actually became an outdoor guide first. And I got a science degree because that was a way to kind of keep exploring the outdoors. I worked on a field crew. We were mapping river canyons, studying water quality, things like that. And I was kind of thinking at the time, well, maybe I'll be a science journalist. And then I ended up going to night school, taking writing classes and kind of incorporating science and and other topics into my writing, but I tend to think of myself as kind of like an outdoor writer or a writer of adventurous history. Or when it came to the space book, I'm really interested in the adventurous exploration elements of, the discovery elements of space travel. That's kind of what unifies all of them.
Well, the thing I was about to ask is both with your space book and also the mysteries of the national parks. There are books about space, there are books about national parks, but you seem to find a different twist, a different story that pulls these items together. How did you come up with mysteries of the national parks?
So the idea for that actually came on a road trip. I grew up out west, and so I went in the beginning. I'm doing a lot of that kind of classic, big national park exploration, big parks like Yosemite, Death Valley, Yellowstone, stuff like that. And then we lived in the Midwest. That's where we met. And there the parks are a little different. A lot of them are rivers, or there's Mammoth Cave. They're just a different style of park. And then out east, a lot of the parks are really focused on history. There's historic sites, national historic parks. There's some national seashores. So just being interested in the parks, we were exploring the parks out this way. And we did a road trip that was started in Washington, D.C. We go to the National Mall, the museums. The National Mall is actually a National Park Service unit. And then we continue the trip and head over to the Outer Banks, and we're going south. We go to like Wright Brothers National Memorial, Cape Hatteras National Seashore. And so we go to a park unit that is Fort Raleigh National Historic Site. And this is the site of the lost English colony on Roanoke Island. Now, being from out west, I did kind of know about that story, but I didn't know a lot about it. And so when I was looking for places for us to go on road trips, I was like, oh, the lost colony site is a National Park Unit site. I'm like, that's really cool. We have to go. And in addition to it being about the lost colony, they also have a nature trail, and they also have a trail that leads to a freedmen's colony. So after the Civil War, freed slaves go and live on this site, and they create a town, and that's part of the Sherman Reservation, and that's really interesting. So we're just going to these sites, and we're just trying to learn all the stories we can about this area, our new area that we live in. So we're now driving away from Fort Raleigh, and I was just like, man, that's a good site, but not a lot of people go to it. And I was like, I wonder how many people know that that's a national park site based around a mystery. It protects a mystery. And I just thought, well, maybe I could do something with that, maybe a magazine article. But then I was like, well, wait, when we were in Washington, D.C., we went to Ford's Theater, and that's also a National Historic Site. And I was like, that is a site that has a lot of mysteries to it, because there's a lot of questions still about the Lincoln assassination. And then as we proceed to some of the other units, Cape Hatteras also has a mystery that didn't make it into the book, but it might make it into a future sequel or something else. So I just, on that drive home, I'm just thinking, I'm like, man, there are a lot of mysteries at outdoor places. And at first I just thought, well, maybe it's just outdoor mysteries you can visit. But as I began to continue to think about it, I was like, how many national park units have I been to over the years that have interesting mysteries associated with them? Instantly, I thought of the sliding stones of Death Valley. I went there on a field trip with the geology program out of UC Davis. There were other mysteries I knew about up and down those big national park units all along the West Coast and the Mountain West. And then I thought about the Midwestern ones I've been to, and I was like, man, there are mysteries associated with those too. So suddenly I was like, this is the concept. The concept is the mysteries of the national parks. And I began to develop the book and the project from there.
Well, you touched on Death Valley, and I wanted to ask that question. What's the story with the sliding stones that weigh literally thousands of pounds?
Yeah. There's a spot in Death Valley called Racetrack Playa. And for a long time, people had noticed that the stones will move across the racetrack, and it was a mystery as to how they move. Now, this is one of those, a few in the books. Most of the mysteries in the book don't get solved, but a few do get solved, and I don't want to give it away. But in the end, the mystery of the sliding stones was solved by a NASA team, or a NASA-funded team of scientists who came up with an interesting and novel way to study the stones. Now, for a long time, there were so many theories about what might cause the stones to move. And I've been trying to find a good way to talk about these without giving things away, but I'll just say a lot of crazy theories came up over the years. And one approach I took with this book was I wanted to tell the chapters, tell the mysteries in a narrative form. And what I want to do is try to tell the story of the mystery so that the reader, instead of just, me saying, hey, this is solved, right up the front, or it's not solved, just let it unfold for them so they could kind of follow along with how it kind of developed or evolved over the years and maybe develop some theories on their own. And so with that story, I really do start it from one of the very first recorded observations, which is a prospector out west, stumbles across the racetrack, brings his wife and gets really curious. And then from there, people keep coming back trying to figure out what is going on here.
Wow. Well, you mentioned NASA, and I also wanted to touch on your book, Space Age Adventures. We were hoping to have you on a little while ago to talk about that, but the scheduling problems didn't work out. But I want to talk a little bit about Space Age Adventures, over 100 terrestrial sites and out of this world stories. I mean, a lot of people want to go to space, but the thing that's fascinating is that astronauts train for space on the Earth, and you have put together basically a list of some of the places that astronauts have trained.
Yeah. So this book, like a lot of my books, what I'm trying to do is, I'm out and about traveling around a lot, and I'm going to sites, and these sites often have stories, whether they're national parks or they're sites with space significance or observatories or whatnot. And the way this book came about, actually, I was working on another project and I was just out having adventures, and I actually got off the Grand Canyon on a private river trip where I rode through the Grand Canyon, and was and we were so tired that day because we had this long night where you float out overnight to get to the final takeout. And there was no way I was going to make it all the way back to, I have a summer base kind of near Moab. I was like, I'm not going to make it back there. I need to just either rent a room, which was that day happened to be a weekend. It was so expensive. I was like, I don't need a room. I'll just find a camp. So I'm driving around in the mountains, hills above Flagstaff, Arizona. And I get into this area, and the area is so weird looking that I just have the thought, this looks like another planet. And I'd kind of known the area was used for NASA astronaut training, but I didn't realize where I was at was a pretty key NASA training area. And so I quickly start to read up on that area, and I'm like, oh, this is one of the lunar analog sites from Apollo. And it's not even really well-known site. Some space enthusiasts do know about it, but it's kind of forgotten. And that is it's called the Cinder Hills or Cinder Lake, Cinder Hills OHV area above Flagstaff, just outside of Flagstaff. And they basically, NASA, they bombed it in the 1960s to create an analog for the Sea of Tranquility. And it just suddenly hit me. I was like, man, there's so many places that are related to space down here in the US, but oftentimes people don't really realize that they're there, or they pass by them. I've kind of been seeking them out, but I hadn't really thought about the fact that how many there were. And so at that point, I'm doing a lot of outdoor adventure projects. I'm also writing about history, and I've done several books where I take a story and create like a travel book that has the narrative nonfiction story, and it has the sites, travel advice, travel tips. And I was like, I think I want to do that for space. So I just start to add to my itineraries when I'm going around doing all the other work. I'm going to all the space sites, and I'm asking around where else are there space sites. I'm doing research. I'm trying hard not to miss any. I only missed a couple, and I want to add those to a second edition. But I find over 100. And I'm talking to people, and they're like, there are 100 sites in the U.S. related to space travel. And I'm like, if not more. So while I'm doing that, I knew I wanted to include stories, because at the time when I was doing these travel books, I always was including narrative nonfiction stories. And what ended up coming together was just a really condensed retelling of the space age. About half of the book is just a very compact. This is the adventurous history of space exploration, and I gave special attention to the stories of spacecraft, things that you could see in the museums, and then in the travel side of the book, I say here's where you could see. This is what in the story side. Here's what happened with the Mercury mission. And then in the travel side, here's where you could go to see a Mercury space capsule. Because for me, that combination really brings that history to life. And if you know what the capsule looks like, it's a lot easier to understand the astronauts' experience when they were up there having, whatever was happening happen.
Well, they're both fascinating ideas for books, fascinating stories. That book you were just referring to was Space Age Adventures over 100 Terrestrial Sites and Out of This World Stories. Your new book is Mysteries of the National Parks. Mike, I thank you very, very much for taking the time to be on the program with us.
So much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Mike Bezemek, author of multiple books, including Mysteries of the National Parks, and his previous book, Space Age Adventures, over 100 Terrestrial Sites and Out of This World Stories. You can go to our website at thestufffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0825, and you'll find the links to Mike's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his books directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder. And boys and girls, it's that moment you've all been waiting for. It's time now for the Idiot of the Day.
And now it's time for the strange things adults do. This Stuff File presents the Idiot of the Day.
A Texas man was arrested twice in Lyon County, Kentucky over the Memorial Day weekend. Police were called about an allegedly intoxicated subject at a business in Eddyville on Sunday. 42-year-old Richard Prunetta of Edinburgh, Texas, made alarming statements to an employee after driving himself to the business. Prunetta was charged with DUI, his vehicle was impounded, and he was booked into jail. Then on Memorial Day, after bonding out of jail, Prunetta called the sheriff's office from his motel to ask for personal items from his impounded vehicle. When the sheriff went to inventory and collect the items, he reportedly found cocaine among items in the trunk of Prunetta's car. Eddyville police were called to assist. They went to the motel and arrested Prunetta again. Prunetta was charged with possession of cocaine and taken back to jail. Now, why? Oh, why? If your car is impounded by the police after your arrest, would you then call from your motel to the police station the next day to get your personal items out of said impounded car when you know that you have cocaine in said vehicle? One reason, and one reason only. You're an idiot!
Gee, I'm only a kid, but even I know you're an idiot.
And that's it for this edition of the Stuff File program, number 0825. Hope you enjoyed it. The website is thestufffile.com, and once again, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H, where you'll find information and links on all of our guests by going to the weekly Stuff File page. Just look for the corresponding program number, and once again, that's 0825. Email me at peter@thestufffile.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Spoutable, Mastodon, and Blue Sky as PA Holder. Check us out on patreon.com, where you can become a patron of the program. Hope to see you back here for our next show on the air, online, or as a download. We're coming to you from everywhere, including KDXRadio.com, over the air on World FM in New Zealand, WNRHLP-FM in Newport Richey, Florida, KZZHLP-FM in Eureka, California, CKUW-FM in Winnipeg, CFMU in Hamilton, CKLU in Sudbury, Local 107.3 FM in St. John, CHSR in Fredericton, and also streaming on just about any streaming service your little heart desires. That's it. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, a presentation of Flying Fish Communications. No animals were harmed in the production of this program, except, of course, the tasty ones. Good night and pass the paprika.